and welcome. I'm Sabrina Nordlund, a marketing manager here at Prolific. Prolific is a participant recruitment platform used and trusted by academics and industry professionals worldwide for their research. Today, I am joined by some very exciting researchers from the Universal Music Group. This is the team behind Solace, a music wellness product that promotes relaxation, focus, and sleep, and it's all backed by cognitive science. Today, we're learning about how they have backed that with evidence built on Prolific. We'll start, if you could introduce yourselves, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do at Universal Music Group.
I'll go first. My name is Rory Smith. I'm the head of product at Solace, which is Universal Music's leading audio wellness venture.
And I'm Emma Rugg, and I head up product design and user research at Sollos.
Incredible, thank you. And if you met someone who had never come across Solace before, how would you describe it to them?
Sure. I mean, I guess we kind of like to think of ourselves as the home of the science and artistry of audio wellness. But what does that mean, like, for a normal person? It basically means that we are a multidisciplinary team. So we've got cognitive scientists, audio engineers, entrepreneurs, user experience specialists. And we're all united in this goal, which is to create science-powered sounds for focus, relaxation, and sleep.
Sometimes we describe Solos as like an auditory vitamin that you can take. It's music that you can listen to that gives you a really quick boost of focus, relaxation, or sleep.
Oh, I love that. And it sits at an interesting sort of intersection, being at Universal Music Group, which is this massive music company, but then being backed by cognitive science and being like quite robust research. Why do you think that this is the right home for research like that at UMG?
Yeah, I think that, UMG brings together a few really important ingredients that kind of underpin what we're doing at Solace. So obviously, we're the home of many of the world's most loved artists. We have an amazing catalogue of music, and our artists are creating new music every day. But alongside that, we have a really long-running history of innovation. And that could be audio innovation, but also technology innovation. I mean, not many people know, for example, that one of our labels, EMI, was at the core of the development of the CT scanner, medical innovation. But we also now have some of the best minds working on AI and machine learning as a tool for human creators. And so if you bring together that amazing roster of artists with this DNA, I guess, of audio innovation, then suddenly you're getting kind of this special sauce, which is really what underpins Solace. And I guess compared to many startups in this space, we are a large company, well-resourced. And so we can really invest in making sure that the music we create is evidence-backed and is actually doing what we want it to do, not just kind of snake oily, vibes.
Yes, definitely. And it is actually engineered to help focus, relax, sleep, and it is backed by cognitive science. So how does it actually look to work on a project like that and make sure that it is backed and it is verified and it has this research behind it? How do you go about making sure that it is all of those things, you're maximizing the impact that the listener has?
Maybe I'll just start by explaining a little bit of like what makes up the music that we create, and then just talking a little bit about how we approach the evidence base for those things. So if you think about the music that we create, there are basically sort of two sides to the special sauce. One is that we curate music from the Universal catalogue or create music specifically based on all sorts of audio properties that decades of research into the cognitive science of how audio affects your mood and behaviour suggest have real impact. And then once we've curated that music or created it, sometimes bespoke, we also look at how we can enhance it that little bit more. And that's where the sort of second side of our special sauce comes in, are auditory beats, what we call sound supplements. Think of them a little like Emma said, like audible vitamins, that are sound waves that are linked to better well-being outcomes in these different verticals that we work in. And so the kind of exciting audio technology behind what we do is analysing the music we work with and working out how to blend in these beats as kind of a new instrument in the mix that respects the artistic integrity of the music itself, but adds that little extra something. And so if you think about, okay, how do we then approach that whole exercise in a way that's evidence-led, is we basically have these two halves of the approach. One is to really ground ourselves in those decades of research about psychoacoustics and the cognitive science of audio. And that helps us build our foundation and think that we're setting off in the right direction. Mm-hmm. But then, and this is where I guess Prolific comes in for us, we've really invested in our own research program, what we sometimes call Solace Labs, which is all about validating secondary research that we based our approach in, but in both a lab, quote unquote lab context, and a real world context. Mm-hmm. And so when we think about how we run research with Prolific, for example, we have kind of two distinct tracks, I guess. The first being that we do kind of treat Prolific as our lab. So we have Tara Venkatesan, our Director of Cognitive Science, leads our research program, and we run rigorous scientific studies, controlled studies, where we test our audio against controls to make sure that all this evidence that we've drawn on in practice is really working and delivering those well-being benefits that we're looking at. But we also know that the way that people listen to music, sort of consume digital products is quite different in a real world context as opposed to the lab. And so alongside that sort of rigorous scientific program, which we really believe in and is very important to us because we publish in peer-reviewed journals, we also run a stream of research where I guess Emma and I focus, which is more looking at how people experience our audio in a real world context. And we have developed a research app, which means that people can integrate their listening into their kind of daily experiences. And we look at then the impact of our audio in that kind of context, also to inform any future scientific studies we might run.
Yeah, wonderful feedback loop that. If we think about the audio that people are actively listening to, a wonderful part of you being at UMG is that you have this catalog and creators that you can work with and artists that you can work with. What does the collaboration look like when you're starting to create that music? Like, how do you approach artists? How does it look like to get them to work with you on creating the final product that people listen to?
I think I'm going to take that one again.
It's a spectrum.
Yeah.
I think, when we think about how we engage with artists, I guess the first thing to bear in mind is that many of the artists at Universal have their own lived experiences of a mental well-being journey. They exist in the glare of the limelight, and for many of them who become kind of breakout stars, that's kind of a roller coaster journey. And with that comes, all sorts of challenges that they're working through. And so when we approach them as Solace, a team inside Universal, to talk to them about that mission, which is really to support the well-being of music fans everywhere, it tends to resonate very strongly because they can see their own stories in what we're trying to do. And even more than that, giving them a way for their music, not just to sort of bring joy and kind of emotional connection to fans in the way that it always does, but also to fill these gaps in a kind of a listening day, if you like, which are more goal orientated, maybe functional, you might say, when you're trying to focus and get work done, when you're really trying to kind of shrug off the stress of a day or unwind and get to sleep. And so those things tend to resonate very well with musicians. I think in terms of how we actually work with them, there's a real spectrum. And it can go from, us doing most of the work, I guess, which is that we, like I said, select music that's suitable for purposes. We do some kind of translation work that's really important. For vocal artists, it's often a bit discombobulating because actually we remove the vocal track because the science is pretty clear that you want lower salience audio, so you don't want to be dragging people into lyrics when people are listening, and so then we might do all that work and then we'll go to the artist team and ask for their approval to release the music. That's kind of the lightest touch end of the spectrum.
Yeah.
But the exciting bit for us as a team is when actually for some artists the mission resonates so strongly that they really want to be involved. And that means that we actually even get into the studio with them. So in the last few months, for example, we've had several musicians in the studio with us. One of our Australian pianists, Sophie Hutchings, was over. And we actually got into the studio to talk about her experience of collaborating with us and how it works to really work with our producers to, you know, create these reimagined versions of her music that are really designed for that journey, in her case, to sleep. So you've got that whole range. And I mean, just to get a sense of how that purpose sort of resonates for people, if you check out Instagram, for example, you'll see there are just videos from very, very varied artists. There's like Dan from Bastille talking about his own journey with insomnia and how, you know, how much that's been a struggle for him. Selena Gomez, one of the biggest artists in the world, is so committed to her Rare Impact Fund and that kind of mental health journey. And so I think, yeah, there's a spectrum of engagement, but I would say in general, once people kind of hear about what we're doing, it's rare that anyone isn't enthused, you know?
That's such a nice... Yeah, I mean, it's something I think a lot of people can resonate with, and it's nice to hear that people are very enthusiastic within Universal Music Group as well. Can you talk me through a little bit about, so you've got the tracks, you're ready to start testing them. What does that actually look like for, say, a participant on Prolific who comes in, sees your study? What did they experience when they're part of this experiment or study?
It depends a bit on the study, but we try and make the studies sort of as enjoyable and close to kind of a normal listening experience as possible. And we have actually had really good feedback from participants. They do enjoy the studies. They do have a good time. So that, I think from their point of view, that's sort of a good place to start. But we do run sort of more longitudinal studies. One that we ran recently was focused on the impact of listening. So we asked participants to listen to a certain amount of focus, relaxation and sleep content over a 4-week period. And then they needed to complete in-app surveys sort of before and after listening to rate how they felt, to see if the music sort of had an effect on how they were feeling. And they also needed to complete a survey at the beginning of the study and at the end of the study. And our goal with this study in particular was to understand, as I said, the impact of listening over time. It was for us to understand if we needed to make any changes or improvements to the overall user experience. We're able to collect some data to help us make some very compelling evidence-backed claims about the product. For the people who listen to our focus content, roughly half experienced a doubling in their level of focus after just 20 minutes of listening. And for the people who really struggled with anxiety and stress, we found that over the course of the study, their baseline anxiety level actually dropped by 25%, which was fantastic to see. And we saw something similar with sleep as well. So for the poorest sleepers, the people who initially reported the lowest sleep quality and had the biggest trouble falling asleep, over the course of the study, sort of by the end of the 4 weeks, they were able to sleep 1 extra hour per night on average. So some really transformational results.
I think one thing that's probably, I mean, I don't know so much about the breadth of the studies that happen on Prolific, but just based on the kind of feedback we get from some of the participants, I think one thing that's unusual is running these studies over such a long time. And learning for us and for participants how to keep them engaged in the right way. I mean, other researchers will commiserate with the frustration of realizing that you can write the same instructions in every single possible place that you could ever imagine, and still people won't follow them. So for us, it's also been a bit of a learning journey to think about in these much longer studies where you're talking about 4 weeks and really quite, like fairly demanding requirements for people to stay on board with what we need them to do. How we kind of guide people through that process. I mean, I think we have a kind of slightly unfair advantage in that basically our product is kind of delightful to use. And so it's not really a punishment to ask people, to listen to our audio.
And the ability to screen for the right type of participants is very helpful as well. So we're able to identify people who already maybe have some mental health challenges or are familiar with streaming apps. So we're getting people who have a very good chance of enjoying the app and finding value from it, which helps.
I should just say, if we think back to those 2 tracks we talked about, Emma and I are quite focused on these more real-world studies. But we also run these more rigorous scientific studies where we have a lot of, hurdles that we need participants to jump through to make sure that they're meeting the requirements we need for a particular study. And actually, that's been a really creative process for our team to learn how to design screening criteria that might be based in some of the stuff you get out of the box with Prolific, but then validated kind of as part of the study. We're doing things that I think is probably unusual in a Prolific participant context. Testing how good people's headphones are. Can they distinguish between this particular volume level and this particular volume level? What are their base levels of trait anxiety and not? These are things that I think, for some participants who are more used to kind of like doing a quick study here or there, it's a kind of new experience. And so we're learning as well about how we kind of handhold people through those journeys, to make sure that they're happy too. Yeah. You may or may not know that there are dark corners of the internet where people talk about the Prolific studies that they do.
Yes.
And I guess it's been validating to see some of the really positive things that people say about working on the Solace studies. Yeah. Hopefully we're getting something right. I think it's still a bit of a learning process.
Definitely, yeah. It will be a bit more of an unusual one for people to take. But it definitely, if you're getting positive feedback on the corners of the internet where participants are, then they definitely really like it.
We have had that feedback directly as well. So we did receive a lot of unprompted messages through the support inbox, people often sharing like really touching stories about how the music has impacted their lives, or just simply saying, I've really enjoyed this study, thank you so much for inviting me. So that's been really validating as well. And I think it also speaks to the sort of general quality of the participants on Prolific. They seem to be very motivated, very willing to jump through these hoops, particularly with things that, as Rory mentioned, might be a little bit unusual in the context of Prolific. Like, for instance, downloading an iOS app from the App Store is something that I don't think many people will have done in other studies, and they did find that a little bit confusing. But people were very willing to jump through the hoops and seek extra information if they needed it. And as Rory said, we did learn a lot in that process too.
Yeah. And when it came to, setting all of this up in the first instance, what made you choose Prolific? Because it's quite a complicated study. It's longitudinal. You're asking people to like sit still with their eyes closed for 30 minutes in some instances. You're doing the headphone screening. There's a lot going on in there. So I'm curious, why Prolific to set all of that up?
I think there are probably 2 halves to it, and some of it is also that we've learnt through doing what Prolific's really good at. I think the very first, honest truth about how we came to Prolific in a more commercial context is that Tara, our director of cognitive science, has a strong academic background and was used to using Prolific in a more sort of academic context, and so that was our kind of gateway to the platform, and then over time, as we kind of explored the landscape of providers that help with participant recruitment, I guess it just became evident that there were particular characteristics of both the platform itself and the participants at Prolific that kind of made it well suited to what we wanted to do. Maybe Emma, you could talk a bit about that sort of participant motivation, which is one thing that we've really, I guess, been impressed by.
Yeah, absolutely. As I said before, they are very willing to jump through the hoops. In the most recent longitudinal study that we ran, we did need participants to, what sort of attracted us to Prolific specifically for that study was the ability to approve participants at various stage gates throughout the process. So rather than onboarding hundreds of people and just hoping that they stick with us for 4 weeks, and at the end of 4 weeks sort of looking at what we have received at the end of that, and then having to re-recruit and go through the process again and again until we get the number that we were hoping for, with Prolific, what was really helpful was being able to set the project up in sort of 4 weeks, single week sprints. So we were able to kind of look at the behaviour, look at the listening behaviour of the participants at the end of each week, make sure that they'd met all of the requirements, and then, approve them and push them into the second week. And that ability alone is something that we couldn't really find elsewhere, that we weren't able to set the study up in that way on other platforms. And the ability to very easily replace participants was very helpful for us on Prolific as well. Yeah. So if we found that there were in the fairly rare cases where the participant was not particularly motivated or they hadn't fulfilled the criteria for that particular week, we could easily replace them. And that just meant that we could operate at speed and we didn't need to lose a bunch of time sort of waiting, re-recruiting, and then moving forward from there.
Yeah, I think one of the things that, at least from my experience, sets Prolific apart slightly is that, that sort of self-service ethos. Other providers that we've worked with, it can be like a very managed service. There's a lot of interaction about, specifying your criteria for recruitment, going away, waiting ages, then they come back, and then, and suddenly, it's like months down the line from when you first thought, oh, hey, why don't we run a quick study to do this? And I think we've been, perhaps a bit surprised actually at how quickly you can just get answers through Prolific, because we can specify a study, we can set our recruitment criteria. If we want to be absolutely sure, we can, set our screeners and everything. And, we can have an answer in days, which might have taken weeks, and frankly, often at a very reasonable price. One of the pieces of research we ran relatively recently actually was looking at the experience of Apple Music users. So, you may or may not know, but one of the big kind of strategic partnerships we've done at Sollos is an exclusive partnership with Apple Music, bringing together, I guess, Apple's commitment to kind of consumer health and wellness, and obviously their sort of leading music proposition. And we wanted to understand, how people were experiencing Solace in that context, how they used Apple Music in a broader wellness kind of ecosystem. We looked at one provider who we'd used previously, and to try and target that user base, I mean, it was a process of weeks and thousands of dollars, to get to that group. And we hadn't actually considered using Prolific for that task, and then we just thought, well, hey, why don't we give it a try? And I think in less than a week, and for a quarter of the price that we've been quoted, we ran that study. Yeah. And hey, look, I'm not going to say it's perfect, and there were teething problems. I think one of the things that we've learned actually in terms of using the platform is the kind of importance of, in a sense, validating the pre-screeners. I think what's hard in any participant recruitment organization is, keeping the sort of demography and other stuff up to date. Yes. So actually, that was a really interesting example on the Apple Music side. We found that we selected the pre-screeners to be only Apple Music users, and then we found all these people who weren't Apple Music users. But I guess that's also where some of the strengths of Prolific shone through, because I wrote to our contact at Prolific and was like, what the hell's happening? And, there was a sort of leaping into action. A, to help us understand how we can design to make sure that we validate that screener, but B, to take that feedback and actually, if I understand correctly, that particular question was a once yearly update, and it's now been moved to a much more frequent update cycle. So I guess that there's a nimbleness to the whole thing, which really works for us, because, although we're part of a big company, we're a startup, and we want to do things quickly, and sometimes the other providers sort of can't keep up with that.
And we have also had challenges with bots with other providers as well, or having to go back multiple times sort of in these very protracted processes and say, I'm sorry, there are just too many responses here that don't feel like they've genuinely come from a human, or a human that is not heavily relying on an AI tool. And that has required us to manually read through many lines of feedback and go back again and again and again. And we just haven't had that problem with Prolific, which again speaks to the quality of the participants, and I think the screening and everything that goes into delivering those participants to the people who need to do research.
Yeah, there's definitely a trade-off between service research providers, where it takes ages. You might get exactly who it is you're looking for, but it's really kind of, we often refer to it as like a black box. You don't really know where they found the people. It might have been from Prolific. And it's a trade-off where sometimes people don't necessarily want to self-serve on Prolific, but we traditionally were a self-serve platform. We do have managed services, but traditionally we're a self-serve platform. So that's where things like, we have bot detection on our platform, so that the huge amount of people who are self-serving on Prolific can just switch that on. We can keep bots out of the platform. Or the nimbleness you referred to of like, we need to update our screeners. There's probably very few people who are using those screeners. Whilst it's very important to you, you might be the first person who's used that in the last 3 months. And so the first person who's noticed that, this needs to be updated more regularly, will immediately go in and make that change. It's interesting. So are you self-serving on Prolific, no managed services? You go in and set everything up yourself?
Yeah, I think pretty much. But what I kind of like about it is, I guess it feels like a bit of a blended model in the sense that we are self-serving, we're doing all the study design, recruitment, ourselves. But whenever we have a problem or a question, I would say that the sort of the support services are just very dynamic. I work closely with one of your colleagues, Joe. He will hop on a call very quickly to work through together the best approach for something. And I think, for us, we like the independence of kind of doing stuff ourselves, but knowing that there's that, I guess, there are people to call on when you need the support.
And that support was there when we were setting up the longitudinal study, for instance. Like, that was something that, as we've mentioned, is not perhaps we'd never used Prolific for anything like that before, and it wasn't really like an out-of-the-box study that one might do on Prolific. And we were really well supported by the Prolific team when we came to the support team and said, hey, we've got this idea. We want people to download an app and listen like off Prolific, but we need to sort of track their listening, and we need to make sure that they're doing a certain amount of things each week. We had this long sort of laundry list of criteria, and your team was like, okay, we're going to figure this out. And they helped us to set up those gates each week and set up a system so that we could make sure that we were only graduating people who had fulfilled the criteria, just really making the platform work for us in a study that was, a little bit different and interesting, which we appreciated.
Yeah. Are there any specific features on Prolific? I think we've mentioned the messaging with participants, which is nice when you get really positive feedback. But are there any other features on Prolific that you use quite regularly or have made a difference in this project?
Yeah, I mean, we've touched on a few of them. I guess there's like screening criteria, obviously very important for us. I think linked to that, actually, we use a lot the sort of screen out, micropayments and stuff, so that actually when we're validating some of those screeners, or where you don't have a screener that we need, we can kind of reward participants, but in a very automated way, just move on, recruit more, and kind of work forward. We actually, particularly for the longitudinal studies, did the kind of back-end work to integrate with the Prolific API so that we could automate some of that participant messaging, also some of the automatic kind of moving participants into participant groups, approving or not in an automated way. I should give a shout out to our head of engineering, who said, please tell them that their docs are excellent. And it was very easy to integrate. So that was good for us. I think there are areas actually of feature development that we're kind of excited about as well, because one of the things I think that came out of that first sort of longitudinal study was that we were kind of trying to do something that maybe the platform wasn't like totally optimized for. And because we had this like stage-gatey kind of process, we actually had to sort of kind of exist in a world where we would create a study and then participants would kind of complete that study, but they would then have to do stuff before they would be invited to the next one. And in a sense, they're then living in this kind of slightly grey limbo where they're doing stuff for which they obviously want to be compensated, but they're not sort of officially yet in a study, because we're only going to put them into the next one when they've completed the stuff. And so, I must say, I was sort of surprised how everyone rolled with that, and it worked perfectly well. But one of the things that I've noticed, and we haven't used yet, is this new rollout of kind of multi-stage studies, which
that would be really helpful.
I'm guessing will be much like better suited to the task that some of the tasks that we run with. I think the other area that is improving, and we'd love to see even more improvement in, is actually the sort of inbox management, because we're, I guess, maybe we're power users, I don't know, we're often running multiple studies at once, we're running different types of study at once. It might be this kind of longer type of study that we've talked a lot about today, but it could be a shorter one too. That inbox management becomes quite tricky quite quickly because it's not clear, that it just all gets a bit muddled. And so there are the beginnings there of improvements that we're seeing, like now that you can filter by individual study in the inbox. But I guess, if we had a wish list, it would be to see the inbox develop kind of into more of a CRM kind of system, which obviously no one ever wants to hear, because you don't want to be building a CRM just to run your, research platform. But I guess that's an area where the burden does still feel like it falls very heavily on us as a team, which is just like, managing all of that feedback. And I think the sort of the other side of the coin of having very engaged participants is that you just get so much correspondence from participants, often about things that you have documented several times already in other places. And so, it would be great if you could have some more stock answers that you can just be like, ping, reuse the same thing that I've said to 45 other participants already.
Particularly if there is, for instance, a bug in the app that we're testing with, which we know about and we're remedying, then we will get from this very motivated group of users an avalanche of emails about the fact that the timer is not working today. It's like, yes, we know, this is okay, it's fine. And so, having some, templated responses that we could send, that we could sort of batch send, would be really helpful in those instances.
Yeah, that's really good feedback, actually, because they are very enthusiastic participants, and they will let you know if anything is not working, which can be very helpful. But if you're recruiting a lot of them and they're all telling you about the same bug, I can imagine, yes, a templated response would be very helpful. Yeah.
There's also just like, I think a funny thing that I didn't expect is like there's a sort of degree of emotional labor to the whole thing, because actually they're also quite emotional, the participants, and that emotion can be hugely positive, like some of the stuff that Emma's talked about, people really sharing these amazing stories and being really grateful, but also kind of can sometimes be really negative in terms of like outrage or sort of feeling of injustice when things aren't quite going as planned. And so learning to kind of manage that roller coaster emotion is definitely part of the bread and butter of running these studies.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Our participants very, very passionate about what they do, which I don't think necessarily all of the researchers who come onto the platform would expect in the first instance, but they take it very seriously, and they're very very passionate about it. And I mean, we've had some great, we get to meet participants every once in a while, and we've had some great stories from people who tell us like how their work on Prolific has just like changed their lives and empowered them. So it is a double-edged sword at times.
And look, they've shared some really beautiful stories with us as well. Like, we've had people taking part in our studies who have had like complex PTSD and have shared some really touching feedback about how Sollos has helped them to calm intrusive thoughts, for instance. Or people who live with chronic pain have told us that listening to our relaxation music can offer them some respite. We've heard from people who have struggled with insomnia for years and now finally have a reliable way to get to sleep. So hearing those sort of really genuine, touching stories, often unprompted, they will often send this feedback to us through the support chat, or sometimes through the more formal surveys that we send them. It's really moving, and it speaks to, I think, the value of what we're building and creating, but also the quality of the participants and the motivation that they have to really not just complete the studies, but to go that step further and really tell us how it has made them feel and how it's impacted their lives.
Yeah. That's so nice to hear. If someone is not a Prolific participant, they can listen to Solace on Apple Music. Is that right?
Yes.
And what does that look like for them going into Apple Music? If anybody's listening to this and going, I want to hear that, I have insomnia, I can't sleep, what do they do to get to Solace?
Well, I mean, probably the easiest thing to do is just search for Solace on Apple Music. All of our tracks and compilations have Solace in their version titling, so it's an easy way to find everything.
Yeah.
Actually, one of the kind of core parts of the partnership with Apple was the creation of an entirely new category in Apple Music called sound therapy. And all of the music in sound therapy comes from us at Solace. And so actually right across the Apple Music platform, hopefully sound therapy finds you rather than you having to find sound therapy. So if you go to the focus category in Apple Music, you'll see, one of the first carousels is all sound therapy focus content. And the same applies in chill, in sleep, in well-being. So as much as possible, the idea is that it shouldn't be hard to find.
Yeah.
But if you kind of want to see specific things, then anything that has Solace in its version titling is an easy way to find what we're doing. I think one of the exciting things about the partnership with Apple is this much broader ecosystem of health and wellness products that Apple have developed, and we're already sort of expanding our partnership beyond just Apple Music. So Solace Audio is also found in Apple Fitness Plus, which is their kind of sort of guided fitness and well-being platform. So you can do yoga classes that are soundtracked by Solace. You can have guided meditations, which use music that we've particularly created for meditation purposes. And, we see that as the beginning. One of the things that we're also doing is collaborating with Apple Health to run research and to look at the ways in which a kind of deeper integration might develop and bringing more features to play. I think one thing that actually would be really nice for us to talk about is a little bit this, the sense in which we see there being a kind of really important relationship between the audio, the music that we create on one side, but also the user experience that goes with it to support its impact. And the research app that we've developed that's available in the UK App Store, anyone can find us, called Solace. It's really about bringing a user experience wrapper to the audio.
Yeah.
And so we have developed lots of features that help people, in this study particularly that we've talked about, help people track the impact of their listening, ask them before they listen how they're feeling, we ask them after they're listening how they're feeling. And then users can build up a personal profile of audio that's really worked for them. Yeah. There's a really nice feedback loop that you can generate that people start to see quantifiably the impact of their listening, and that draws them back into the process. And so I think where we started in our journey with Apple Music is quite a kind of traditional DSP, we would call them, kind of user experience. And what we're doing with the Solace app is really exploring how you can enrich that experience to drive more impact for users.
And I think some of the research that we've done recently on Prolific has been very central to helping us continue to improve these features on the research app, and then eventually some of that will flow through into the Apple work as well. So some things that have come out of the recent study, for instance, are the fact that feedback loop that Rory was just touching on is not quite clear enough yet in the app. So we found that a lot of participants either didn't quite notice the impact features, or they didn't notice the fact that we were recommending content that was specifically based on what had historically worked well for them, or they noticed it but they didn't quite understand why that was valuable to them. So we're now in the midst of creating some improvements to the product to help make those things sort of easier and more impactful for users. So there's that really direct relationship between the research that we run on Prolific, the data that we collect, the product improvements that we make for our own app, and then eventually, as I say, hopefully that does also flow through into the Apple work as well.
One of the things we perhaps understand is that there are going to be different types of user for this kind of audio. And so you're going to get people who are music lovers anyway, who listen in a very kind of what we would call lean back way. And for them, that sort of DSP Apple Music context, which is quite familiar, is going to work really well. It's kind of like, oh, I've discovered this content, it's kind of helping me, I'm getting on with my life. But what we also see, and this definitely is clear in the different types of participant we see from Prolific, is that you have a type of user who really loves that more sort of what might be called quantified self kind of approach, where they're really excited about like data, understanding this stuff. And it's those users who are really going to benefit from a much richer experience. And so one of the things that we're doing with our research on Prolific is also understanding how our path to market and our relationship with customers can exist in these sort of slightly different places. The Apple Music partnership is hugely important for us, but we're also thinking about, do we want to, create more direct to consumer relationships, which might bring that more enriched user experience, in a different context. So you might get, your lean back listeners in Apple Music, your really engaged listeners are subscribing to a specific Solace commercial app proposition. And so we're still exploring kind of the best ways of doing that. And I think it's fair to say that kind of Prolific is a really big part of that exploration.
Also for pricing, right? Like we've run pricing studies on Prolific with these really engaged users to get a sense of how much they would consider paying for a direct-to-consumer product, what that could look like. We present various different options to them. And the fact that they have used the product for a longer period of time through some of these longer studies means that they really understand its value and its impact on their lives. So having access to those people to be able to ask very targeted questions about willingness to pay is extremely useful for us.
Yeah. It sounds like you've done a lot of different types of research on Prolific, which is music to my ears.
Maybe just on that, I think, I guess the point that we're sort of learning in the process is if you think creatively, you can really use Prolific for a lot of different things. So, one of the things that Emma was talking about, which I guess is very important to us, is on the one hand, we've got this kind of rigorous scientific evidence base. We talk about confidence intervals. We talk about, significant or insignificant results, null results, all these things that are very important and mean a lot to the scientific community and give us a credibility that matters. It's hugely important for us. But actually, we want to be able to tell a story that real people understand. And so through, the longitudinal study we've talked about, and some of that user feedback, we can start to make these much more real world claims that bring to life what Solace is doing for people. One of the things that one of those creative use cases, I guess, that I've really enjoyed is, as Emma says, we get a lot of this really moving kind of testimonial from users, but obviously within the general contract of Prolific, that's usually completely anonymized and we don't have a direct relationship. But we thought we'd have a go at reaching out to some of those users with a new study which explicitly said that we'd ask them to be open to sharing personal information to see if they would want to provide video testimonials about their experience. And we got great take-up. And so suddenly here's this use case for Prolific that I just hadn't really conceived of, but it's giving us this really powerful human story to bring to life what we're doing at Sollos. And so I guess the only thing I would say to anyone that's thinking about using Prolific is don't get stuck in thinking that it's like some sort of academic research tool. Basically it's a gateway to loads of engaged people from all walks of life, and you can kind of ask them anything. And you think carefully about how you ask them and how you screen them. You can get really useful insight.
And if you think about how we used to do this, right, or before Prolific, the way that we would try and get testimonials like this is we would have small groups of users that we would directly recruit and manage. We would need to cover everything from doing the screeners, managing incentives, issuing the surveys, setting up the interviews, inviting them into the office, setting up a recording studio of sorts, or perhaps doing that over Zoom, managing all of the NDAs, getting the legal team involved. Getting what we've got from Prolific has been such a smooth journey, and previously it took so much time for us to do all of this sort of in a more manual way, and so many more resources from not just our team but the rest of UMG as a whole. So being able to do this on Prolific, it just 10x's the speed that we can move at.
And what is next for your team? What's the next piece of research that you're going to be working on?
Well, if we think about those two tracks, we've got some really exciting research that we're just kicking off at the moment with a leading healthcare organization, actually. And this is looking at clinicians who tend to work on shift patterns, so often doing night shifts and things like that. looking at whether we can support their sleep. And so we're running this really cool, again, like longitudinal study, but much, I guess, more rigorously controlled, led by Tara, our Director of Cognitive Science, to look at how our audio impacts sleep. And we have a kind of a rigorous sort of control group there where we're testing kind of audiobooks, which is often a very frequently used sleep aid, against the Solace audio that we've created. And we're using a bit of a range of tools to think about how we look at impact there. So we're also testing for the first time distributing smart mattresses to participants to look at some of the kind of more quantifiable data that we can get from that process. We're also going to run more studies that look at the kind of in-moment impact of our audio. So specifically looking at more of the stress and anxiety reduction. And we're working on some new papers, which will, again, go into peer review. So I guess we've got like a real range. There's so much going on. I mean, one bit of sort of amusing trivia that it might be useful to share is that we've decided to name all of our studies after dinosaurs. Because it was sort of becoming confusing, like how we talked about them. I'm not entirely sure that it's less confusing to talk about them as dinosaurs.
I was very confused coming back from maternity leave and then seeing all of these dinosaur names on our sort of Trello board was a little bit confusing to me.
I mean, you really have to like know your dinosaurs.
Yeah.
I do not. But the team who are naming the studies absolutely love it. And there's always a kind of, depending on if the study is about, volume levels, then we're like, okay, which dinosaurs had the best hearing, this kind of stuff. There are many dinosaurs still to come, and so we've got a really rich I guess future plan for research. The one big area that we're kind of looking at moving into and have already started, I guess, with our partnership with Apple Fitness Plus is looking at the power of our audio for fitness and physical performance and everything that comes with that. So it could be a recovery. Obviously sleep is a big part of physical performance, and so we've recently co-authored a kind of literature review that's looking at this with a leading kind of sports scientist, and we're now kind of beginning to scope out more of a research program to kind of see how that will go.
Oh, as an avid runner, I'll be keeping an eye on that one. I think there's a lot that you can unlock there. And I mean, that's also a huge market. Everybody's running these days.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not me.
Also not me.
It'll get you eventually. Oh, that's so interesting. Well, thank you both so much for joining me today. It's been fantastic to learn about Solace. I will make sure that we have links to your research in anywhere where we're distributing this. So if you're curious to learn more, you can find those. And I will also link to the Apple Music and the app as well. So thank you both so much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
It's been a pleasure.